Buried beneath official records and wartime headlines lies a story they never wanted you to hear. It whispers from the shadows of forgotten cities, behind coded broadcasts and blood-stained notebooks. What began as a whisper became a threat, one that could have changed the course of history. But to follow it is to step into a world where truth is dangerous, and silence is weaponized. You've opened the door. Now, listen carefully. Ghosts of the Fjord, Operation Shadowfjord. In the winter of 1944, the fjords of Nazi-occupied Norway were cloaked in silence and shadow. Snow fell in thick, sweeping sheets across the icy ridgelines, muting the sound of war, but not ending it. Beneath the surface of the frigid waters, German U-boats prowled like wolves, resupplying at a secret naval facility hidden near the village of Arvika, carved into the cliffs and protected by camouflage nets, searchlights, and anti-air batteries. The Allies had no photographs, no maps, only whispers passed by the Norwegian resistance. At the heart of this resistance was Ingrid Nygaard, a 34-year-old schoolteacher who had quietly transformed her classroom into a covert operations hub. A widow of a Norwegian soldier killed during the invasion, Ingrid was composed, fiercely intelligent, and relentless. To her students, she taught history and literature. To the SOE, she passed coded reports hidden in ink-washed essays and church choir lyrics. She had become known by her codename, Veilfire. In January 1944, British intelligence launched Operation Shadowfjord, a plan to eliminate the U-boat base before it could cripple Allied convoys during the spring thaw. Captain Thomas Alden of the Royal Navy was inserted by sea under moonless skies, disguised as a Scottish fisherman whose boat had strayed too far north. He met Ingrid in a barn outside Arvika, where they spoke in low voices among the hay bales, maps spread across a wooden crate. The operation would be small, surgical, and devastating. They had 2 weeks. The local resistance, led by Ingrid, was comprised of only 9 men and women, most of them farmers and fishermen. They lacked weapons, uniforms, and time. But what they did have was precision. The German base was supplied via a narrow cliffside railway and defended by 2 flak towers hidden inside the rock itself. Every morning at 5 o'clock, a coal train entered the tunnel from the south. Every night at 21:30, supply boats arrived at the dock below. If the team could sabotage the railway and ignite the fuel depot simultaneously, the resulting explosion would set the cliff ablaze, and with it, the base. Ingrid's knowledge of the terrain was unmatched. By day, she attended school and hummed folk songs. By night, she crawled through icy ravines, measuring distances and marking drop points with pine branches tied in red string. On February 2nd, the first of 3 Allied supply drops arrived. Parachutes laden with plastic explosives, Sten guns, and rations. The villagers hid the supplies beneath fish crates and beneath the pews of the village church, whose priest, Father Madsen, had long ceased praying for peace and started praying for revenge. But the Germans were not blind. An SS detachment had been stationed nearby to investigate rumors of sabotage in the region. Their commander, Oberstleutnant Erich Bauer, was a man with a sharp uniform and a sharper nose for deception. He interrogated the villagers one by one, always smiling, always courteous, but always leaving behind fear. He did not yet suspect Ingrid, but he would. As the date of the assault approached, tensions rose. One of the resistance members, a young dockworker named Leif, disappeared after a drunken argument in the town square. Ingrid feared betrayal. Captain Alden feared the window was closing. They pressed forward. On the night of February 10th, beneath an aurora that shimmered like ghostly fire above the fjord, the operation began. The resistance split into 3 teams. Ingrid and Alden, carrying charges wrapped in oilskin, approached the railway tunnel from the north, crawling on hands and knees over frozen scree. Their breath formed clouds in the dark. Just before 5 o'clock, they placed the charges on the rail junction and retreated, wires trailing behind them like nerves. At the dock, resistance fighter Axel Thompson and his sister Marit, disguised as German supply workers, wheeled barrels of fuel near the depot, carefully attaching detonators beneath the carts. A third team, including Father Madsen, moved to disable the searchlights with rifle fire at the moment of detonation. The explosion tore through the dawn like thunder. The railway line erupted in a gout of flame as the coal train, carrying munitions bound for U-boats, was blasted from the tracks and into the frozen sea. Seconds later, the fuel depot lit the cliffs like a volcanic burst, sending a column of fire skyward. The fjord reflected the chaos, and the white mountain faces burned orange. But the Germans reacted with terrifying speed. Bauer had suspected something, and when the lights failed, he ordered an immediate counterstrike. Troops swarmed the village. Marit was shot trying to escape. Axel vanished into the forests, bleeding. Father Madsen was captured at the church, where he had taken refuge in the bell tower. Ingrid and Alden fled through the pine woods, pursued by dogs. At a frozen river crossing, Ingrid turned and opened fire, covering Alden's escape as the sound of barking and German shouts closed in. She was last seen at the edge of the treeline, standing beneath the northern lights, her figure swallowed by falling snow. When the Royal Navy returned a week later to assess the damage, they found the base in ruins. Half of the German U-boat activity in the North Atlantic ceased for nearly 2 months. It was a tactical victory bought with blood. Captain Alden survived the war and submitted a full report to the Admiralty, requesting posthumous commendations for the Arvika resistance. His final note on Ingrid read, *, she never fired a shot in anger before that night. But when she did, it was for her land, her students, and every soul lost to silence. Veil fire burned bright. *. Ingrid Nygaard's name is carved in the stone memorial at Arvika Church, just beneath a stained glass window that shows a schoolteacher holding a lantern in a winter storm. To this day, local children sing a folk song once used to pass codes, a tune that speaks of fire in the fjord and a voice in the dark. The Black Orchestra music resistance and the death of a dictator. In the grand halls of wartime Berlin, where chandeliers sparkled above bomb shelters and concerts masked the growl of air raid sirens, a quiet rebellion was orchestrated not with rifles, but with violins. The Berlin Philharmonic remained a gleaming cultural symbol under the Nazi regime, handpicked by Joseph Goebbels to represent the superiority of Aryan art. But beneath the flawless performances and ovations, a conspiracy tuned itself into motion, a conspiracy known by its members as the Black Orchestra. The group was led by fictional composer Otto Weissmann, a conservative aristocrat turned anti-Nazi dissident. Disillusioned by the brutal repression of Jewish musicians and the regime's manipulation of art, Weissmann used his connections to gather a circle of performers, conductors, and composers. They were men and women who understood not only counterpoint and harmony, but secrecy, precision, and sacrifice. Among them was pianist Anton Kramer, a Jewish-German prodigy once declared degenerate by Nazi critics. Having survived imprisonment at Dachau thanks to forged papers and a bribed camp officer, Anton returned to Berlin in 1943 under an assumed identity. Anton Keller, a pure German accompanist. He played quietly in shadowed corners of rehearsals, his fingers steady even as his heart pounded beneath a false name. The Black Orchestra's mission was not symbolic. It was lethal. Their aim was to assassinate Adolf Hitler during one of his rare public visits to the Berlin Staatsoper. The plan was radical, desperate, and made more urgent after the failed July 20th plot. The group knew the Führer avoided large public events. He distrusted crowds, noise, even applause. But he still adored opera, particularly Wagner. His bodyguards could not silence that. Weissmann, using his influence with propaganda ministry liaisons, learned that Hitler would attend a special performance of Götterdämmerung on March 3, 1945, in what was touted as a symbolic affirmation of Germany's final victory. Weissmann's orchestra would play. Anton would be at the grand piano. The target would be less than 50 feet away. The weapon was a bomb hidden inside the leg of a concert grand piano, an innovation designed by British SOE engineer William Harrow, who had infiltrated Berlin months earlier via Sweden using falsified Swiss credentials. The explosive was triggered by a wire attached to the soft pedal mechanism. Anton would play one specific chord, lean in, depress the pedal, and ignite the device. The risks were staggering. The Staatsoper was crawling with SS. Every instrument was subject to inspection. If anything felt off, the tension in a string, the length of a bow, a whisper exchanged between performers, it could unravel everything. Yet the Black Orchestra pressed on. To mask their plans, they embedded coded messages in sheet music. A certain passage in Weissmann's composition Elegy for a Vanished Age was a literal map of the Staatsoper's floor plan. Arrest at measure 37 marked a column where the bomb signal would bounce most cleanly. A crescendo in the cello line disguised a Morse code plea for Allied bombing delays on that night, anything that would ground the Luftwaffe and distract the city's anti-air units. The night arrived like the slow draw of a bow. Outside, the city shook under the dull thunder of artillery from the approaching Red Army. Inside, the Staatsoper glimmered. Guests wore tuxedos salvaged from rationed closets. Uniformed officers and high-ranking Nazis filled the balconies. Hitler entered with a ghost of his former swagger, his health failing, his mustache trimmed with trembling care. Applause rang like a cracked bell. Anton sat at the piano, hands poised. The overture began. The orchestra swelled with Wagner's doomed grandeur. In the fourth movement, the cue would come. A descending series of notes. A breath. Then the chord. Anton felt the wire underfoot. His shoe rested lightly against the pedal. Weissmann, conducting with cold clarity, nodded once. Time slowed. But someone else had seen. SS Obersturmbannführer Felix Gruber, in charge of stage security, had grown suspicious of Anton's papers weeks earlier. He'd seen him in a cafe, his face familiar, perhaps from a pre-war concert in Munich, perhaps from a Gestapo bulletin. He hadn't acted then. Now, standing near the edge of the curtain, he saw Anton's foot lingering over the pedal too long, saw the sweat bead along his temple despite the cold. Gruber shouted. A shot rang out. Anton collapsed forward onto the keys, his head striking the board. The orchestra halted in a dissonant scream of strings. Chaos erupted. The bomb detonated prematurely, sending a shockwave through the pit. The piano was obliterated. Fire and shrapnel tore through the front rows. The opera house ceiling cracked. Hitler survived, by a stroke of cruel chance. A last-minute decision to delay his entrance by 10 minutes had saved him. The explosion killed 12 high-ranking officials, wounded dozens, and destroyed a symbol of Nazi culture. The aftermath was swift and merciless. Weissmann was arrested the next morning, tortured for days, and hanged with piano wire in his prison cell. Others in the Black Orchestra were rounded up and executed. The story was buried. Official records listed the event as a technical malfunction. Anton's true identity was never confirmed by Nazi files, only later recovered in diaries left by Weissmann's niece, herself a violinist who survived by fleeing to Denmark. But even in failure, the Black Orchestra left a dissonant note in the Nazi regime's final months. Goebbels ordered all concert halls to close indefinitely. The sound of music no longer served the Reich, it had betrayed it. In the post-war years, the rebuilt Staatsoper chose not to commemorate the bombing. But in a quiet corner of Berlin, at a modest music school now housed in a former SS headquarters, a memorial plaque reads, "To those who chose melody over murder and gave their final measure to silence a tyrant." The Black Orchestra had played their last concert. History forgot their names, but not their rhythm. Beneath the Waves, the Last Voyage of WWII, 556. The North Atlantic in 1945 was a place of ghosts. Icebergs drifted like silent sentinels beneath a pale sky, and the roar of Allied depth charges echoed through the water like the distant heartbeat of a dying war. In this haunted theater sailed U-556, a Type WWII U-boat that vanished in March of that year, only to resurface weeks later with no living soul aboard. The story of U-556 began in Wilhelmshaven in 1943. She was commissioned under Captain Lieutenant Erich Mahler, a decorated officer with a reputation for precision and composure. But those who served with him would later speak, when they dared, of his obsessions, of omens, whispers, and the sea's hunger. Mahler believed that the ocean remembered, that every shipwrecked sailor, every downed aircraft, every drowned soul left a trace in the deep. U-550's first missions were routine. She shadowed convoys, fired torpedoes, and fled depth charges. But her crew soon noticed anomalies. strange radio interference, phantom contacts on sonar, whispers in the metal hull when submerged. One night, while diving beneath an American destroyer in the fog, sonar picked up what they thought was another U-boat on a collision course. Mahler ordered evasive maneuvers. But there was nothing there. Just stillness. The sonar officer, Oberfunkmate Klaus Weber, swore he heard tapping, Morse code, from the water itself. The crew dismissed it. Stress, fatigue, fear. But Mahler began recording the sounds. In the captain's log, later recovered, he wrote cryptic notes. Voices at 240 Hz, same as before. Not mechanical. He stopped referring to the Allies as the enemy. He called them the others, and marked their positions with crosses rather than dots. On February 25, 1945, U-556 was sent on a solo mission to intercept a convoy believed to be carrying components for the American atomic project. Mahler did not argue the orders, but in private, he told his first officer, Lieutenant Heinrich Voigt, "This war is already lost. We are no longer fighting men. We are fighting time itself." The convoy never appeared. For 12 days, U-556 patrolled alone in a stretch of ocean off the Newfoundland coast, beneath storms and frost. Then something changed. The radio operator ceased reporting to duty. He was found in his bunk, eyes wide open, catatonic. When they attempted to move him, he whispered a single phrase, "We're not alone. We've never been alone." On March 9, 1945, U-556 transmitted a garbled message to Kriegsmarine Command. "Have seen them. The ones beneath. We must go deeper." That was the last signal. The Navy declared the sub lost. 3 weeks later, on March 31st, the Canadian Navy received a distress call from a fishing trawler. A submarine had surfaced, listing to one side, its conning tower scorched. No response to hails. No crew in sight. The Canadian corvette HMCS Langley approached cautiously. Boarding parties found the hatch unlocked. Inside, the interior was in perfect order, except for the absence of human life. Food on tables, boots lined neatly. No signs of violence. The torpedo tubes were loaded. Engines were operational. But the logs had stopped on March 10th, with one final sentence scribbled in Mahler's hand. "We reached the threshold. The sea opened." More disturbing were the audio recordings found in the captain's quarters. The tapes, now lost to time but transcribed by Allied intelligence, captured metallic groaning, intermittent tapping, and what analysts called non-random tonal patterns, possibly Morse code, but not in any recognizable language. A British cryptographer claimed the sounds resembled fragments of U-boat distress calls from 1942, submarines long since destroyed. And then there were the drawings. Pinned to the walls of Mahler's cabin were maps marked with red spirals, and sketches of geometric patterns no one could identify. One depicted the U-556 submerged beneath the wrecks of other U-boats, stacked like bones, with a dark shape above them. Circular, vast, featureless. Mahler had written one word beneath it. Horror. The listener. Canadian intelligence towed the U-boat to Halifax, where it sat in port under armed guard. Then, one morning, it was gone. Naval records suggest it slipped its moorings during a storm and sank. But the official weather logs report no such storm that night. Some claim they saw lights beneath the harbor waters. Others say the sub never left the dock at all, that it was quietly dismantled by British engineers and buried in the archives. Captain Mahler and his crew were never found. In 1948, a sailor from U-556 was discovered in a French asylum under the name Hans Becker. When questioned, he spoke only in riddles, refusing to acknowledge the war had ended. His favorite phrase, recorded by hospital staff, was, "They're still listening. You just have to dive deep enough to hear them." In recent decades, deep-sea divers searching near the coordinates of U-550's last transmission have reported sonar anomalies, metallic echoes at impossible depths, far below crush limits. One submersible camera captured a single, flickering image, a curved steel plate bearing part of a serial number, 556. The ocean holds its secrets well. And some say U-556 still roams the Atlantic Trench, crewed by ghosts, running silent beneath the ice, listening for the war that never truly ended. To this day, no German naval vessel has ever been named U-556 again. The Flowers of Saipan, Forgotten Angels of the Pacific. In June 1944, the island of Saipan became a crucible of war, a place where empires clashed, civilians perished, and the line between duty and horror blurred into dust and flame. As the U.S. Marines stormed the beaches under relentless fire from Imperial Japanese forces, another tragedy was quietly unfolding in the volcanic cliffs above: the fate of nearly 300 schoolgirls trapped in the labyrinthine caves near Marpi Point. The girls had been relocated to Saipan in 1943 under the Civilian Relocation and Defense Initiative, a program that ostensibly trained teenage girls in agricultural labor and civil defense. In reality, it was a poorly disguised effort to use young civilians as human shields for strategic locations. Most of the girls came from Okinawa and Kyushu, daughters of poor farmers, conscripted into service under slogans of loyalty to the emperor. They were given minimal training, bamboo spears, and ideological indoctrination that glorified death over surrender. Among them was 17-year-old Misako Haneda, a shy but fiercely intelligent girl from Kagoshima. Before the war, she had dreamed of becoming a nurse. On Saipan, she was given a red armband, a dented medical satchel, and told to assist the wounded, then die with honor. What followed was weeks of digging trenches, cooking for soldiers, and learning how to pack grenades. But Misako, unlike many of her peers, never forgot her dream. She hid anatomy textbooks beneath her straw mat. She practiced first aid on insects. And when the bombing began, she transformed. As the U.S. invasion swept south to north, Imperial commanders ordered the retreat of all remaining civilians to the cliffs at Marpi Point, a jagged ridge overlooking the sea. There, in a network of limestone caves, the girls huddled in darkness. Food ran low. Water came from condensation or was collected from runoff after brief tropical rains. The screams of wounded soldiers filled the tunnels. Outside, the skies thundered with American artillery and the drone of aircraft. On June 22, as U.S. forces neared the cliffs, loudspeakers in Japanese warned the girls that the Americans would torture, rape, and kill them. Propaganda painted the enemy as demons. Mothers were told to kill their children before capture. Some schoolgirls, believing this, tied ropes to each other and leapt off the cliffs in groups, crashing into the rocks below like petals blown by a cruel wind. But Misako refused. She had already helped dozens of wounded civilians, creating makeshift splints from scrap wood and dressing wounds with torn clothing. She knew the Americans weren't monsters. She had treated a wounded U.S. Navy pilot who had crash-landed near the coast 2 weeks earlier. She had hidden him in a drainage culvert for 3 days before he escaped. He had spoken little Japanese, but enough to say asterisk, "You don't have to die for them." Asterisk. Misako began moving from cave to cave, speaking to the girls, begging them not to believe the lies. She told them surrender was not shameful. She spoke in the language of medicine, not war, of healing, of survival. She carried a tattered radio tuned to Japanese civilian broadcasts, a channel that had gone strangely silent, until, one night, it returned. That broadcast became legend. On June 25, a static-filled voice crackled through the darkness. Misako's voice. She had connected the radio to a scavenged transmitter powered by a bicycle dynamo. Her message was brief, clear, and poetic. "We are the flowers of Saipan. We bloom in darkness, not for the emperor, but for the future. If you hear this, do not leap. Do not burn. Do not die. Live, even in shame. It is better to live." American soldiers later described hearing faint, rhythmic sounds echoing from the caves, what they thought was a song. In fact, it was Morse code, broadcast in bursts over the same frequency, spelling out asterisk, wounded. Civilians. Help. Asterisk. Marine units advancing toward Marpi Point were shocked to find dozens of girls waving white cloths from the cave mouths. Many were skeletal, barefoot, eyes wide with terror, but they did not fight. They did not run. They had listened. Misako was not among them. She had stayed behind to treat a mortally wounded child and was caught in a grenade blast as an Imperial officer attempted to detonate the cave. Her body was never recovered, but her satchel was found, charred, blood-stained, containing handwritten notes on triage techniques, and a folded photograph of the wounded American pilot she had saved. Of the original 300 girls, fewer than 90 survived. They were transported to Guam and later to Japan, where they lived in the shadow of memory. Many became nurses, educators, peace advocates. They called themselves Misako no Hana, Misako's flowers. For decades, their story was ignored by post-war governments eager to shape sanitized narratives. The sacrifice of civilians, especially those manipulated by propaganda, was inconvenient. But the survivors persisted. In 1974, they erected a small stone marker near Marpy Point with a poem carved into it. "We did not leap. We did not burn. We bloomed beneath the gunfire, and carried hope in trembling hands." In 1991, an elderly American man visited the site with a folded paper crane. His name was Charles Avery, the pilot Misako had saved. He left the crane at the foot of the marker and spoke no words, only tears. Today, visitors to Saipan still walk the cliff paths where young girls once stood on the edge of life and death. Most are unaware of the caves that lie beneath, or the radio signal that once pierced the silence with a girl's gentle defiance. The flowers of Saipan were not soldiers. They were not heroes in the way monuments remember. But they were brave. Brave enough to say no. Brave enough to live. Echoes after midnight, the Czech conspiracy, and the race for the bomb. In the heart of Nazi-occupied Prague, beneath the broken arches of the Charles Bridge and the watchful eyes of SS patrols, a secret war unfolded, one not of bullets or tanks, but of numbers, formulas, and whispered equations. It was a war of minds. At the center of it stood Dr. Zdeněk Ryba, a Czech theoretical physicist with the eyes of a dreamer and the silence of a hunted man. Before the war, Ryba had been a rising star at the University of Prague, a contemporary of Einstein's Czech collaborators, studying atomic theory in the shadow of the coming storm. When the Nazis annexed Czechoslovakia, Ryba refused to flee. Instead, he turned his talents to resistance, not with sabotage, but with subatomic sabotage. By 1943, the Nazis had established a covert research project in the Bohemian Highlands. Known only by its codename Project Mitternacht, it aimed to develop a dirty bomb, a radiological weapon that could contaminate Allied landing zones and halt any invasion of Fortress Europe. The Nazis lacked the fissile material for a true atomic weapon, but they were close to mastering dispersal techniques using stolen radium and early uranium isotopes. They were dangerously close. Ryba had been quietly conscripted into the project, his value too great for the Nazis to ignore. But he had no intention of aiding the Reich. Instead, he formed a network of scientists, janitors, and even forced laborers who passed secrets out of the research facility using an unlikely method: poetry. Each week, Ryba sent a handwritten letter to his sister in Brno. Inside, disguised as innocent verse, were equations, lab results, and material inventories. A stanza about a raven circling twice before dusk described centrifuge rotation speeds. A haiku on moonlight and rust was a coded warning about radium instability. These letters were passed through the Czech underground, through taverns, puppet theaters, and even disguised as pages of children's fairy tales. Eventually, they reached the hands of OSS operatives in Switzerland, who confirmed that Germany's radiological program was more advanced than previously believed. The Americans were alarmed. Manhattan Project scientists in Los Alamos pored over Ryba's poems, stunned by the clarity and courage encoded in metaphor. His intelligence may have accelerated American uranium enrichment efforts by weeks. But he paid a price. In January 1945, Ryba learned that the Nazis planned a live test of their radiological weapon on a Czech village suspected of aiding partisans. The location, Terezin, already a concentration camp turned grotesque propaganda showcase. The idea was to wipe it from the map while blaming partisans for the destruction. Ryba had days to act. Together with a former Jesuit seminarian turned saboteur named František Kohout, and a French chemist known only as Claire, later revealed to be Claire Levesque of the Free French Forces, they devised a plan to contaminate the test materials with inert compounds that would cause a failure. The danger was extreme. Prolonged exposure meant almost certain death. The night before the test, under moonlight filtered through frozen glass, Reba and Claire infiltrated the lab. Using stolen keys and memorized guard rotations, they replaced canisters of enriched powder with mixtures of chalk, iron filings, and resin. The switch had to be exact. A single mismatch could be fatal. They succeeded, but Claire was caught on the way out. She bought Reba enough time to flee into the woods, where partisans were waiting. The next day, the Nazi test failed. The detonation fizzled into a cloud of harmless dust. The scientists blamed sabotage, but no culprit was found. Claire was executed within the week. Reba did not stop. As the war neared its end, he compiled all his remaining intelligence into a final poem, 38 lines written in iambic pentameter, addressed not to his sister, but to the children of tomorrow. It included coordinates, isotopic ratios, the locations of buried canisters, and warnings of lingering contamination. He sent it via a priest riding a Red Cross supply wagon. It reached Geneva. From there, it made its way to London, then Washington. It arrived on April 8, 1945. 14 days later, American forces captured what remained of Project Mitternacht. They found equipment scorched by retreating Germans, incomplete designs, and a single message scrawled on a chalkboard in Czech. Asterisk, we chose the dawn. Asterisk. Reba was never seen again. Some claimed he died in a skirmish with German troops in the forest. Others believed he crossed into Soviet territory and was imprisoned by the NKVD, who feared his knowledge. A few whispered that he made it to Sweden, living under a false name, teaching children mathematics with a haunted look in his eyes. After the war, his story was buried under the avalanche of nuclear history. Hiroshima and Nagasaki eclipsed all else. But among physicists, those who knew the margins, Reba was remembered. In 1963, a retired OSS agent published a memoir titled Echoes After Midnight. One chapter described decoding Reba's poetry beside a fireplace in Bern, and the realization that, without him, the Manhattan Project may have come too late. In 1999, a sealed envelope was discovered in a hidden compartment of an abandoned Prague library. Inside were the original poems, meticulously annotated, alongside a small silver pendant shaped like a dove. A postscript in faded ink read, "We were asked to build a bomb. We built a choice. May it echo after midnight, when the world remembers what silence costs." Today, a plaque near the ruins of Terezín's experimental lab bears his name. Few tourists stop to read it. Fewer understand what he gave. But in certain corners of scientific circles, the name Zdeněk Reba is spoken with quiet reverence, not as a martyr, but as a reminder that even in the darkest hour, one voice can delay the end of the world. The war may have ended, but some stories never sleep. They hide in sealed archives, in unmarked graves, in verses too precise to be poetry. And if you listen closely, after midnight, when the world is still, you might hear their echoes. What they built wasn't just resistance. It was a warning. One history nearly erased. But now, you know.